Rossa, Rossa. I'm from Ireland. I'm up to a few weeks ago. I was a member of the European Parliament, and this is why I'm here. I was president of the European Parliament's delegation to the Palestinian Legislative Council for a number of years, and was a regular visitor to Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and so forth, to the point where I became known in the Israeli embassy as the most anti-Semitic member of the European Parliament. But you know, that's the price you pay when you try to stand up for human rights and for democracy in the Middle East, particularly when the interests of Israel are affected. My purpose here today is to try and explain how the European Parliament has an influence, or might have an influence, obviously drawn specifically on my experience in relation to the Israel-Palestine conflict. First of all, I think it's important to get a grasp of how the European Parliament actually works, because it's not the same as national parliaments in the European Union. You don't have a government sitting on one side and an opposition sitting on the other. We have 750 odd members of the European Parliament elected by 500 million citizens in Europe directly, and so we are hopefully responsive to the electorate in terms of what we do on a whole range of areas to do with the European Union as a whole. It's one leg of a three-legged stool: the Parliament, the Commission and the Council. The Council is made up obviously of the member state governments, and the Commission are nominated by the member states, and normally, not in every case, but not successfully in every case, supported by the European Parliament. So there's this interaction of three institutions which produces legislation on the one hand on a whole range of things to do with labour law, and to do with, now under the Lisbon Treaty, also to do with international trade, which I will touch on a bit later in my short contribution here. I think it's important to understand as well that the Parliament is based on political families. It's not based on nationality. We don't sit, when we're in the European Parliament, we don't sit in an Irish delegation, UK delegation, French delegation, and so on. We sit in political families: Social Democratic, Christian Democratic, regionalist, Green, Communist, Liberal, and even xenophobic nationalist. So you know, it's quite a spectrum. So I think it's important to bear that in mind, because to a large extent the political philosophies of those groups influence the decisions that one makes when you're debating issues and trying to put forward a decision. And we try to take, by and large, European positions as distinct from national positions. But of course, MEPs are elected by their electorate at home, so they have to be responsive to their electorate at home. The geographic location of their state also has an influence. Those in the southern Mediterranean countries clearly will have sensitivities because of the geographical proximity of the North Africa and the Middle East, and so on. Many members have sensitivities because of their history in the Second World War. Others will have sensitivities because of a whole range of other issues. So these also come into play and become part of the debate on any given issue. I think I suppose to move on, make the point that obviously immediate events also have an influence on what decisions are made by the European Parliament. I'm not going to go into the detail of how the Parliament itself is structured, because that would take too much time. But I think in relation to what we're discussing here today, I think one of the eye-openers on how our EU values and principles could be ignored when faced with unwanted outcomes in the European Union was a response by Europe to the election of the Palestinian Legislative Council in 2006. I was an observer of that election on behalf of the European Parliament, along with a number of others. and everybody agreed that it was one of the most democratic elections we had ever observed. It was like being part of an election at home in Ireland. I mean, it was one of those kind of, and it was really fascinating to see the young people in particular campaigning and involved and so on. But having encouraged Hamas to participate as a way of drawing them into the political mainstream, when they won the election, which wasn't expected by taking 60% of the seats, they were promptly ostracised. Despite protests from many of us that we could not dictate to Palestinians or anyone else who they should vote for, and indeed the European Union and the United States proceeded to ostracise the government of which they were a part. In my view, that led to the bloody strife, civil strife that occurred subsequently, and of course we then have what's referred to as the coup detat in Gaza. This flew in the face of the democratic rhetoric and the human rights radical rhetoric, which is at the core of the EU treaties. This is not just a question of rhetoric, it's a question that we are obliged under the treaties to put human rights and the promotion of democracy at the core of our external relations. This has been done, I mean, in terms of the rhetoric of the European Union. But clearly, this about face by the European Union and all others in face of an election outcome that they didn't like badly damaged the credibility of the European Union, certainly amongst Palestinians. It seems to me that lesson at least has been learned now in the current situation. Nevertheless, the Israeli lobby, despite all of this, in the European Parliament has been gradually chipped away by the ongoing siege of Gaza and all the other crimes, in my view, that take place against Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and in Gaza. Detention of children by the military, being tried in military courts, and so on and so on. I mean, the list is endless. I mean, one of the things that particularly anger me are the killing of people, the shooting dead of people, and the injuring of people inside the border of Gaza, where Israel has its outposts on the border, where because they're under siege, the people in Gaza move in too close to the fence as far as they're concerned to get material, to recycle it and so on, and they're shot. Children are shot dead by moving within 300 yards of this fence. This is a regular occurrence. It happens regularly. I mean, you're talking about dozens, at least dozens every year. We never hear about it. It's never reported. But in any event, that's just, as I say, a hobby horse of mine. But I think the major catalyst in the European Parliament for the shift in thinking in the European Parliament on the Israel-Palestine conflict was the war on Gaza by Israel, with Palestinian casualties we all know about, 1,400, mostly civilians, 300 children, and with 7 Israeli casualties, 4 of them as a result of Israeli crossfire. The Parliament was incensed at how slowly the European Union reacted to this carnage, seeming only to exert any real pressure when the Israelis were in fact on the point of withdrawal. And indeed, Prime Minister Netanyahu has come to be seen in the European Parliament as more concerned to maintain his government in office than in fact to make any progress on talks with Abbas and with Fayyad, who are seen in the European Parliament as the embodiment of moderation. And if Israel is not going to make peace with them, who are they going to make peace with? This is the way it's seen. I'm simply explaining the way it's seen. The first significant setback for the Israeli lobby in Brussels was the adoption on the 10th of March in 2010 of the resolution supporting the Goldstone report that contained the criticism of the Cast-led operation. The vote on that resolution had a majority of just under 50 votes. The European People's Party, the Christian Democratic Party, refused to sign that joint resolution. Nevertheless, it was still carried. And the motion that they put forward, which was supported by the Israel lobby in the European Parliament, was defeated by 120 votes. The second significant vote was on the issue of a UN seat for the Palestinian state on the 29th of September 2011, when the Palestinians launched their campaign. The feeling amongst the Israeli lobbyists around the parliament and their MEP supporters was that such a resolution would not even get on the agenda, and if it did, it would be beaten in plenary. However, it was in fact carried by a 2-to-1 majority, a far bigger margin than that on the Goldstone report. And indeed, it included the signatories of the European People's Party at that point. Clearly, the outcome was influenced by the Arab Spring and the need for consistency in what the European Union was saying, what the European Parliament was demanding in relation to Libya, in relation to Syria, in relation to Tunisia, that these same principles had to be applied to Palestinians and indeed to Israel. The outcome obviously was a vindication of those of us who had regularly argued at the beginning from a minority point of view, from a minority position, that without consistency in our approach in the region, our credibility would suffer, and indeed those states in breach of human rights and democratic norms would simply go through the motions of compliance without real substance. There is now a belated and welcome awareness on the part of the Council and the Commission that its emphasis in its foreign policy on ensuring stability on its borders and getting access to potentially lucrative markets by tolerating authoritarian regimes while cajoling them to respect human rights and democratic norms is a failure. In its communication just published last year, in December last, on a more effective approach to human rights and democracy, the Commission frankly admits, and I quote, "The EU has not always been as effective or as joined up as it might have been." I'm afraid that's as far as I'm prepared to go. The task in hand is to ensure clarity, coherence and effectiveness of policy. In the same communication points out that since 1995 the EU has included human rights clauses in political framework agreements with third countries, now covering more than 120. Now, that clause, it says, forms the legal basis for measures taken in response to violations of human rights. But when challenged over the years by myself and others about them implementing this clause in relation to breaches of human rights by Israel, we were informed previously that this wasn't a legal basis, that this was simply a political objective. It would be interesting to see to what extent that new definition of these clauses stands and to what extent we can pressure them to in fact use it. It is striking that in the three communications published, one in March, one in May and one in December of last year, setting out how the European Union should refocus its external actions and supports in response to the Arab Spring, references to the Israel-Palestine conflict are minimal and seem to be regarded as outside the framework. In its communication entitled "A Partnership for Democracy and Shared Prosperity to the Southern Mediterranean," there is a single sentence, quote, "Now more than ever, changing dynamics in the region mean that urgent progress on the Middle East peace process is vital." That's it. In the meantime, this year's reports from the heads of EU delegations in Israel and in the occupied territories draw attention again to what Europe should be doing to defend its positions on East Jerusalem, i.e. that its annexation is illegal, the settlements are illegal, and on the other, the need to more vigorously pursue discrimination by Israel against its own Israeli Arab citizens. That these are the ambassadors that the European Union have based in Israel and in the Palestinian territory, in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. These are the 27 ambassadors in Tel Aviv and the 27 ambassadors in Jerusalem. And they have consistently produced reports pointing out how the European Union needed to act if it was going to be serious about ensuring that its policies on human rights and democracy were pursued. And up to now, they have essentially been ignored. Again, this is a point at which I think these reports need to be dusted down and the recommendations drawn out and waived in front of the Council and Commission. Then there's the so-called ACAA agreement, which is currently on the agenda in the International Trade Committee. of the European Parliament, ACAA, the ACAA. I think it can be taken as an indicator of how the Commission, the Council and some MEPs still seek to separate out from the push for democracy in the rest of the region the Israel-Palestine conflict, at the root of which is the demand by Palestinians for their democratic rights. ACAA simply means Agreement on Conformity, Assessment and Acceptance of Industrial Products. Essentially, it's intended to facilitate the export from Israel of pharmaceutical products into the European Union. And it's a proposal to add a new protocol to the association agreement between the European Union and Israel. It's been blocked in the European Parliament by MEPs since 2010 when it was first read. There are now moves afoot by a number of MEPs who are close to the Israeli lobby on the International Trade Committee to unblock it, to move it forward. They have set a date for a voting committee on the 26th of April, and the intention is at least it's provisionally scheduled for completion in the European Parliament plenary in June. Now, these are provisional dates, and these things change because you have to plan well in advance in order to get things. My time is almost up, I think. I'm just near finished 2 minutes. Anyhow, I thought I was only speaking for 2 minutes. Anyhow, the point about this, I think this is an important point, because the first thing to make, is that in the debate in January on this issue in the International Affairs, in the International Trade Committee, there wasn't a single reference to the document the Commission had published in December, showing how it was going to enhance its role internationally in the region in relation to human rights and democracy, and insisting that the countries it was doing trade with would have to comply. It was referred to this as the silver thread running through its international external relations policy would be human rights and democracy, and it would be benchmarked and so on and so on. It wasn't referred to in the debate in the committee at all. It's now been, as I say, going to be voted on in April. The Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament has waved a red flag, or at least a yellow flag, or perhaps a yellow card, and said, hold on, we want to look at this, and they've asked for a legal opinion on it. I don't know what the terms of that legal opinion is going to be, or what angle they're looking at, but I think the question as to whether or not upgrading relations with Israel at this point in time, when no progress has been made in the negotiations, the proximity negotiations that are taking place between the Israelis and the Palestinians, when the illegal settlements continue, etc. And that this requires us to give serious thought as to whether now is the right time to upgrade relations with Israel. I would argue strongly that it's not, and I intend as an ex-MEP to lobby the MEPs to make sure, if I can, that particular agreement is blocked until such time as there is progress. The final point I make in 30 seconds is the Howard Report. The Howard Report is a report on the human rights in Europe and in the world, which the European Union, the Commission produces, it's supposed to produce every year. This is actually a report on the 2010 situation. Richard Howard is one of the best, in my view, MEPs that the UK has sent to the European Parliament. He produced an excellent report. He actually draws attention to, in his report, although strictly speaking, it's not part of the context of this particular report, but he draws attention to the lack of coherence between what the European Union is doing vis-à-vis Israel and Palestinians, and its declared intentions in the documents that it produced in the last 12 months. That also is a report which I think anybody who's interested in this area should pursue and should ensure that there is some serious thought given as to how we can now exercise some leverage on the European Parliament, on the Commission and on the Council, in other words your member state government, as to what we can do to ensure that the silver thread of human rights and democracy actually really means that we can leverage real change in the situation and the conflict between Israel